We've just marked the 10th anniversary of September 11th, and it's soon going to be a decade since our forces crossed the border into Afghanistan. We entered that conflict for a cause, and our brave men and women in uniform have largely accomplished the mission of ridding Afghanistan of al-Qaeda and the international terrorists that were threatening the United States. I wanted to begin today by honoring and stating once again how proud I am of all those people that have given service to this country, and I also want to thank all of you for your service to the country and to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines whom you supported. I asked Chairman Chaffetz to call this hearing to examine the problem of contracting corruption in Afghanistan. I thank him for doing so and for working with us on this issue. Last year, I led a 6-month subcommittee investigation of the major Department of Defense logistics trucking contract in Afghanistan. Our investigation found that the trucking contract had spawned a vast protection racket in which warlords, criminals, and insurgents extorted contractors for protection payments to obtain safe passage. Our investigation further showed that senior officials within the United States military contracting chain of command had been aware of the problem, but had done little to address it. In plain English, the investigation found that the Department of Defense's supply chain in Afghanistan relied on paying the enemy and fueling corruption in order to maintain our substantial military footprint. Following the subcommittee's investigation, General Petraeus established 3 task forces designed to address the problem of contract corruption, and he issued new contracting guidelines to break down the silos between contracting and operations. These were important first steps. Since then, the Department has provided multiple briefings to the subcommittee staff demonstrating substantial progress in identifying where U.S. taxpayer dollars are going. I commend the Department for that ongoing effort. Unfortunately, the picture presented is not pretty. Recent news reports stated that the Task Force 2010 had specifically identified and traced over $360 million in contracting dollars in Afghanistan that had been diverted to warlords, power brokers, insurgents, and criminal patronage networks. The task force also confirmed the results of the subcommittee's investigation, finding that many of the trucking contractors were in fact making illicit payments that ended up in the hands of the enemy. The Commission on Wartime Contracting looked at contingency contracting in both Iraq and Afghanistan and estimated that upwards of $60 billion in U.S. contracting dollars have been lost to waste, fraud, and abuse. I fear that these reports are only the tip of the iceberg. Much of the Afghan economy now centers around the United States and international military presence and logistics contracts, but a significant portion of those funds seem to end up supporting the Dubai real estate market rather than jobs in Afghanistan. At the top of the hierarchy, there are weekly reports about politicians or brothers and cousins of politicians who've obtained multi-million-dollar contracts with the United States government. At the bottom of the hierarchy, the extortion of international contractors is a booming industry. Today, the business of Afghanistan is war. How can we ever hope to extricate ourselves from the war when so many Afghans benefit from the insecurity that is used to justify our continued presence? To my mind, we've crossed a tipping point in which the size of our military footprint inadvertently fosters further instability. Every additional soldier and every additional supply convoy that we send to Afghanistan further fuels this cycle of dependence, corruption, and endless war. With that said, I want to focus today on the hearing on 3 basic questions. 1, what is the scope of contracting corruption in Afghanistan? 2, what is being done to address it? And 3, how can we dramatically reduce it? Although I'm skeptical about the design of the current United States endeavor there, for today's hearing we'll focus on practical solutions that hopefully can be implemented right away. Congress has also had an important role to play. This spring, I worked with the Armed Services Committee to include an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act that would give commanders in the field more authority to immediately stop contracting with companies that undermine the efforts of our troops on the ground. I recently introduced a bill to establish a permanent Inspector General for overseas contingency operations, one of the key recommendations of the Commission on Wartime Contracting. I encourage my colleagues here today to join me in that legislation, and I'm also working to draft comprehensive contingency contracting reform legislation to fundamentally change the way we do business in war zones. I want to close by reading from General Petraeus' counterinsurgency contracting guidance released in September of 2010. He wrote, and I quote, "If we spend large quantities of international contracting funds quickly and with insufficient oversight, it is likely that some of those funds will unintentionally fuel corruption, finance insurgent organizations, strengthen criminal patronage networks, and undermine our efforts in Afghanistan." Simply stated, we can't afford to fail at getting a handle on contracting corruption in Afghanistan. It is utterly unacceptable for any taxpayer dollars to ever make their way into the hands of those who would use them as a means to harm our brave men and women in uniform. So I appreciate your testimony here today, gentlemen. I look forward to our discussion. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman.